when I worked this year out, I wanted to call it something like homosexuality or something, and I was told, oh, you can't say that here. I said, really? Why not? Like, I don't we look life in the face over here? So they said, oh, no, alternative lifestyles. Yeah, fine, okay. Maybe in Yovan, as we say in Hebrew. Discerning person, understanding person will understand. But that's what it's about. I don't have to tell you that the Torah is against. And what I want to do eventually is get to the arguments of the people who think that these choices are personal choices and there's no such thing as right or wrong or good or bad, and every child lifestyle choice is as good as every other lifestyle choice, and therefore it's not an appropriate thing to criticize. I want to get to that. But first of all, I want to make the Jewish position clear because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of the Jewish position. First of all, what is the status of same-sex attraction in the Jewish picture of what it is to be human and what it is to be flourishing and human and the purpose of human life? Well, for one thing, at the beginning of chapter 5 of the book of Genesis, it says, it repeats again that God created mankind, male and female, and he called their name Adam. Not his name, their name. Which means the word Adam, strictly speaking, applies to a male-female pair. It means real humanity is found in a male-female pair. Not in a male alone, and not in a female alone, and not in same-sex pairs. That's deeply, deeply prejudiced, right? Prejudice against all sorts of human choices and so forth and so on. Yeah, it is. Right, correct. Not pretending that it isn't. Furthermore, it says that a man should abandon his parents and cleave to his wife, v'davak b'ishto, v'hayu lebasar echad, they'll become one flesh. Now, it is true that Rashi explains that's how procreation takes place. But the Ramban and others say it's certainly true that that's how procreation takes place, but after all, that's what animals do also. And nowhere do we read that pairs of animals become one flesh. So, presumably, there's more to it than just that. Not to say that what Rashi says is wrong, chas v'shalom, can't say anything like that. But there's more to it than that. The marital bond is something which integrates them into this single joint entity, which is Adam. It's the way that they procreate because one of the things that they're here for in earth is to be parents. Pru Ravu, God said, be fruitful and multiply to Adam, and then by implication to Adam and Chava, said in the plural, that you should have children. So you're here to bring children into the world. That's part of your purpose in the world. And cementing the relationship is also part of your purpose in the world. And in fact, there is an obligation on both husband and wife for sexual intimacy with the other partner, even when procreation is impossible. Even when the wife is pregnant, even when they've both gone past childbearing age, there's an obligation on both sides. And in fact, the biblical obligation is on the man's side. He has a specific verse in the Torah that tells him that he must be prepared to engage in that kind of connection with his wife. She has a different type of obligation, but it's a necessary part of a marriage in the Jewish sense. Now, one of the challenges that people raise to this idea is that you don't have to be a heterosexual couple to love each other. Two men can love each other, and two women can love each other. So, why would you think that the heterosexual is special? Since love could be same-sexual as well. And the deep answer here is that, yes, indeed, people of the same sex can love one another. that shouldn't be a surprise. After all, parents can love their children even of the same sex, and children can love their parents of the same sex. And friends can love one another deeply, but each type of coupling has a different quality of love. They're all genuine, they're all true, they're all faithful, they're all inspiring, but they're different. Woe to the parent who loves the child the way a husband loves a wife. Woe to the teacher who loves the child the way a brother loves a brother. They're different relationships, different ages, different responsibilities. And what's being said here is that the type of relationship that you have between a man and a woman is a different type of relationship that two men can have and two women can have. And they can all be characterized by some love or other. But the love that you have between husband and wife is different from the kind of love you have between man and man or between woman and woman. And we are created to have that kind of love and that kind of integration and that kind of marriage, not the others. Other relationships are valuable in their place. David and Jonathan are examples of two people who would lay down their lives for one another. Except for some pure, ignorant, benighted member of the Knesset who wanted to explain it in the most gross, inappropriate way. You don't have to see dedicated and powerful and inspiring love as a substitute for marriage. That's a love between two men who are deeply, deeply friends, loving one another. So what? That has nothing to do with marriage. Marriage is a different type of love. In particular, since in the nature of things, men and women are different in significant ways, forming that kind of relationship between a man and a woman means getting a little bit out of yourself. It means stretching yourself to try to understand someone who's different from you. Learning to identify with what's different about the other person than you. Now, maybe this is grossly unpopular today because everything's supposed to be about me. But this is what's demanded in a husband and wife relationship, where you step out of yourself and work to try to climb into somebody else's world that's different and see the world out of their eyes, and they see the world out of your eyes. And in that way, you share a much richer experience than you would have if you were simply alone, and much richer experience than if two men are together or two women are together. So it's not a question of love in that sense. And because this is the background, homosexual actions are forbidden, though not in the same degree for men and for women, but they are forbidden. And for women, maybe that's not something would say there's not a problem. It's homosexual actions. And the condition is not desirable, especially if in either sex it displaces your ability to have a heterosexual relationship. That would be regarded as a disability, a serious personal disability. Now, here comes a point which is in general very important and very, very important in this particular discussion. There's a categorical difference between evaluating actions and evaluating agents. To call an action illegal, immoral, bad, cruel, criminal, and so forth and so on is reasonably objective and reasonably observable. That's why you can punish crimes, because there's reasonable agreement on the kinds of actions which are illegal and reasonable, and I would say immoral and cruel and so forth and so on. But agents is another matter. How do you evaluate the agent who performed the action when you don't know what he's living? You don't know what he's experiencing. You don't know what his resources are. You don't know what his temptations are. You don't know what his limitations are. And our sources say that whereas you can evaluate actions, that's why there are courts, and courts do judge actions, but it's not up to us to evaluate people. We don't evaluate people. Rambam writes this explicitly: only Kel Deos, the God who knows the inner life of the person can evaluate the person. So when you see someone performing, let's say, SSA type action, and you know that Judaism, SSA is short for same-sex attraction. Right? When you see someone performing an action like that, and you know Judaism is against the action, don't conclude that the Judaism is against the person. That doesn't follow. It might be the person can't help himself. It might be the person doesn't know. There could be all sorts of reasons that he's doing it, which would result in empathy for the person, and sympathy for the person, and pity for the person, and a desire to help the person and aid the person, and shouldn't think that because we strenuously condemn the actions, that therefore we're going to injure or disadvantage or hurt or exclude people who have these conditions. This doesn't follow. So a lot of the Torah's description of the actions, when carried over to people, sounds very cruel, but carrying it over to people is a mistake. I have here a bunch of examples of where the Torah detaches the action from the agent, and where the evaluation of the agent is much, much milder than it is of the action. I wrote down the sources here. If you want to share it with somebody, all the sources are written there. So let's take a look at this. First of all, ignorance. A person doesn't know what he's doing or why he's doing what he's doing is bad, hasn't heard that there's any problem with it, is greatly reduced in evaluation. He's not doing anything deliberately. You could ask whether he should have known better. That you could ask. A person should have known better. It's what we call a shogeg, and that person is semi-responsible for what he does. But he's not vicious. He's not a criminal actor. He's just irresponsible because he didn't investigate. So ignorance is definitely a mitigating factor. And if a person grows up ignorant, then even after he's not ignorant anymore, he may have a very large-scale excuse. The Rambam is writing about people. He was living in the time of the Karaites. Now, the Karaites were a Jewish group who split from the tradition by denying the oral tradition and saying they're going to live just by the book. That is to say, the book of Moses. Well, that's a heresy. It's a terrible heresy. The Rambam says, let's consider a third-generation Karaite. He grew up with Karaite parents and Karaite grandparents. They had groups. They had whole communities. They had a literature. Indeed, in some places, they lived in the Muslim lands. They had the favoritism of the Muslim caliph of the area, and they got support, and those who were faithful to the tradition were a separate group, and they were a minority sometimes, and they were looked down upon. Now, this kid grows up in his family, and when he's 19, somebody says, hey, your parents left out a lot. There's the whole oral tradition. What do you expect from him? Says the Rambam, you can't expect anything from him. Because he grew up with this training. All the people he knows about, all the people he cares about, all the people whom he respects, told him A. And now you're telling him it's wrong. B is true. He is, the Rambam says, ke'anus. He's like a person who's under duress, under threat of his life, and therefore you continue to approach him with love and with sympathy and with concern. He uses a poetic phrase, avosos ahava, cords of love, strings of love, to try to bring him back to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So now he knows. He knows they're the Rabbinites, as they were called, as opposed to Karaites. He knows the Rabbinites are also Jewish. He knows that they have a tradition. And he knows that you're not allowed to do things that are only in the oral tradition. But he can't relate to that because he wasn't brought up that way. He's still regarded as almost completely not responsible for what he does. Then there's a very interesting case, the Gemara in Shabbos. A is chasing B to kill him, and B is looking for refuge. It's life and death. And he has a choice. He can go into the house of a Jewish atheist, or he can go to the house of a non-Jewish atheist. Which one should he choose? And the Gemara says, choose the non-Jew. Because his atheism isn't based on real knowledge, rejecting real knowledge of God, real understanding of God. He's less criminal than the Jew who's rejected it. And that being the case, you should go to so you see how serious it is, how criminal you are, depends upon how much background you have and how much you're denying when you take the wrong step. And not everybody who's an atheist has the same status. Indeed, in the book of Jonah, I think it was a Brisker Rav who said this. In the book of Jonah, you have a very interesting set of events. Jonah's a prophet. God tells him to go prophesy, doesn't want to do it, gets on a ship, and there's a tremendous storm that threatens the ship, and it's going to go down. And the sailors ask Jonah, he's a stranger to them, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm a Jew. I serve the Creator of heaven and earth." And Jonah says, "I know why this is happening, because I'm running away from God. God doesn't like it." So he says, "Throw me into the sea." And the people there, by the way, who are not Jewish, are exemplary. Halavai, the non-Jews we deal with today. We don't want to do that. Your blood will be on our hands. We can't do that. We try. They throw over all the baggage to try to save the ship, and they can't. Finally, they say, "God, please don't judge us." He said to throw him. They throw him into the water, and the weather goes fine, and they sail all the way to port. Now, these people who are sailors on the boat, who are they? They're all idol worshippers. So the Bishop asks, well, isn't this a little unbalanced? Okay, you have a Jew who's not doing the right thing, and there's a storm, and they who are idol worshippers, which is the worst thing in the world, and they get fair weather, and they sail to port, and they collect their salary, and so forth and so on. And the answer is, what do you expect from them? Their whole society is idol worshippers. Their whole philosophy is idol worshippers. They don't know anything different. You expect every one of them to be Abraham? That's not reasonable. You can't expect that. Of the Jewish prophet, we expect much higher behavior. So how much we expect and how much will be punished depends upon what your resources are, what could be reasonably expected from you. So that's ignorance. Another case of ignorance, the Maharal comments in the Gemara, that those who are not learned in Torah walk in the dark. That's his description. Now, what do you think of a person who walks in the dark and stumbles and falls? Okay, he's walking in the dark. That'll happen to people when they walk in the dark. You could say, get a light. Yeah, you could say that. And it might be practical, it might not be practical. But then, he's not guilty for falling, he's guilty for not getting a light. And if it was very difficult to get a light, it cost resources he didn't have, then he won't be guilty for that either. The Rambam, as I said before, talks about individual circumstances, what your background is, where you're coming from, what what your desires are, what your needs are, what your inspirations are, what your resources are. All of that goes into evaluating the status of the agent, and we typically don't know those things. Then there's something which comes up over and over again, even in Chumash. The pasuk says, the Gemara says, Hakadosh Baruch Hu medatek b'tzadika k'chut hasayra. Hakadosh Baruch Hu is exacting. He's very strict with those who are close to him, the righteous, to a hair's breadth. You aim to the target, you're off by the width of a hair, bang, you get it. But those only the tzaddikim, only the very righteous. The more capabilities you have, the stricter the standard by which you're judged. So if you have less capabilities, you won't be judged by that kind of standard. The Mendelssohn violin concerto is a very easy concerto. It's really very easy. It's not taxing or difficult at all. And the person gets up there and plays in public and makes 5 mistakes, it depends upon who he is. If he's Yasha Heifetz or René Capuçon, who's a wonderful violinist now, or Julia Fischer, they made 5 mistakes in the Mendelssohn, the person's a bum. You should be able to play that blindfolded and sleep. If he happens to be the concertmaster of the local county orchestra, that's a very good performance. We have different standards for different people. So now the problem will be when I'm looking at the person doing the action, I don't know what standard the Kodesh Baruch Hu is holding him up to, because I don't know what capabilities he has and what difficulties he has. That being the case, again, I can't judge the person on the basis of judging the actions that he performs. There's a wonderful Pri Tzadik on a Gemara in Tanis. The Gemara tells the following story. One of the great sages was in the marketplace, and someone there was remarking about a third party, and he said, "Look how ugly he is." I'm sorry, no, the sage. The sage saw someone and said, "Look how ugly he is." He was shocked by the ugliness of the person. It wasn't just his physical appearance, but it was also, you could see, his character. And that person said back to the sage, "You say I'm ugly? Go to the craftsman that made me." Oh, let's see now. The craftsman that made me. Who could that be, huh? Philip down the street? No, the craftsman that made me is God. He's saying, you look at me as ugly in this way? Blame God for it. Now, the commentators point out that this ugly person was really Elijah the prophet. And he was sent to provoke that response from the sage so that he could be answered, go to the craftsman that made me. And the Pri Tzadik, one of the Hasidic commentators, explains as follows. What Eliyahu was telling that sage is this. You get out of bed in the morning, what's your goal for the day? Your goal for the day is to be perfect. Well, who were your parents? Who were your grandparents? In what context did you grow up? What schools were you educated in? Who were the examples that you lived with? Yeah, your parents were great people, your grandparents were great people, and your society was the elite of the population, and lots of inspiration, and you had an exquisite education, and you have as your goal to be perfect today. I didn't grow up like you did. I grew up in very mediocre circumstances. My parents were not very well educated. I had to leave school when I was 9 so I could help support my parents. The people around me are rough. My goal for the day is to be decent the whole day. Your goal is to be perfect the whole day. My goal is to be decent the whole day. Who told you that your efforts are dearer to a Kodesh Baruch Hu than mine? After all you have is your effort. That's all you contribute. I didn't choose where I was put on the ladder of accomplishment, and you didn't choose where you were put on the ladder of accomplishment. If the accomplishment goes from 0 to 100, you were put on 85, and expected to climb to 95. And I was put at 30, expected to climb to 40. If we each climb 10 units, you know better than I am. So why are you looking down at me? And that's the message here. When I look at the second guy and I think, oh, look, he's just trying to be decent. You know, what kind of life is that? You're not looking at it from God's point of view that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. All he wants from you is the effort that you put out. So when I look at that action, if this action that the mediocre person did was performed by the sage, it would be a horrible crime. But for the mediocre person, it could be average and quite respectable. Now, when you look at a person, to know in detail what level he climbed onto the ladder at and how much progress he's made and how much is expected from him is, again, something which we can't know. There's a fascinating Gemara in Bava Basra. In the book of Job raises all sorts of complaints about the way Kodesh Baruch Hu runs the world, and Gemara calls this blasphemy. A long section of Bava Basra where the failures and faults of Job are laid out in detail and criticized at great length. And then there's one verse which says, Eov b'li das yidaber. Job speaks without knowledge. Well, when I first read that, I thought to myself, well, then keep quiet. What do you mean speak without knowledge? You don't have knowledge? Don't say anything. Rav in the Gemara doesn't take it that way. He says, Eov was in terrible pain. He was subjected to terrible pain. And because he had terrible pain, he lost his ability to understand things clearly, and therefore he's not guilty. He's not guilty for all the terrible things that he said, because he spoke b'li das. If he had spoken with a composed mind and deliberate mind, and said these things with purpose, then he would have been responsible and guilty. But because he spoke that way, so stress can produce a reaction of a person which relieves him for a great deal of responsibility. I told you that example that happened to me in Boston, where the fellow came in and was yelling at my Rebbe, and I stood between the two of them, pushed him out. And the Rebbe was calm, and I asked him, how could you be so calm? And he said, because I know what's going on at home. I thought, oh, I don't know what's going on in his home, but he knows, and he sees that he's a guy who's under pressure, and he's just lost it. That's not the same as deliberately saying terrible things. Now here we're talking about SSA and sexual matters. It's a very, very interesting Tosfos in Gemara Sanhedrin. Let's suppose that a person is guilty of deliberate sexual crime. It could be adultery or other sexual crimes. Certain types of crimes carrying certain types of punishments disqualify a person for testimony. He no longer can function as a witness. Tosfos says, on the basis of certain considerations, that if it's sexual crimes, it doesn't disqualify the person for being a witness. Because the impulse to sexual crime is so powerful, this doesn't express the nature of the person's character. It's an impulse that he didn't control. He should have controlled it. He's responsible for not controlling it. But it doesn't indicate complete corruption of his character, like, for example, a paid witness does. Eid Hamas, something which does cost. So here, the Gemara through Tosfos anyway is pointing out that not all failures have the same consequences, even if the severeness of the punishment is the same, but the struggle to avoid them isn't the same. And since that's the case, they don't have the same consequences. And sexual infractions have less severe consequences than other types of infractions. So again, if we're talking about a person who's involved in SSA, and he hears that we're against it, but the question of how we feel about him, it has all these qualifications built in.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Is it safe to say that every man, when it comes to his his gain and his progress in life, is it to be able to we should have so we all have certain things we have to work on, and like you said, the sexual thing is what was the terminology you used? Is he should have had control.
Right.
Control, right?
Right.
So my question is, do we all have a responsibility to control our so our main responsibility here is to control our physical desires?
I think that's right, but it's you see, words are slippery, words are funny. That makes it only negative, and it makes it very, very narrow. I would say where we have the responsibility to use this area of life in the way that the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to use it, both control and expression and nuance and timing and sensitivity and all the rest. It's not just saying control, it makes it much too narrow. The project is a much bigger project than that. But I'm in the middle of a kind of, did you get an outline?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're in the middle of number 4, towards the end. The last one that I have here is this. There's another source. In other words, because a sexual crime typically is not fully deliberate, the part of him is out of control, and therefore the consequences are not as serious as those consequences. So the bottom line of this section is, when you hear how much the Torah opposes these types of activities, you shouldn't draw a conclusion, therefore the people who do it are really horrible criminals. No. There's no jump from the action is bad to the person is bad, or how bad the person is, because there's a lot of factors which could take a very serious action and mitigate it to the point where the person's responsibility could be very little. I'll give you the last one. I don't know if I didn't put it in here, because I guess I took it for granted. Let's suppose somebody puts a gun to a Jew's head and says, bow to the idol, or commit a sexual crime, or I'll kill you. Now, the rule is he should let himself be killed. And the rule is people have free will to do that. People have chosen to die rather than commit one crime or another many, many times in history. Jews and l'havdil non-Jews have done that. That's what he should do. But suppose he fails. And suppose there are witnesses. And suppose he's warned. Listen, this is a capital crime. And if you do this, we can go to the court and we give testimony and be punished by the court. Suppose he says, I hear you. I just can't let him blow my brains out. I can't do it. I just can't do it. And maybe he can. He doesn't realize he can. Not willing to make the effort. And he fails. What then is his punishment? With witnesses and with warning. The answer is no punishment at all. And this is not controversial. Because he had a gun to his head. So, that's not an expression of deep, twisted, immoral character. That's simply, I can't die. The way I put it is this: if you're willing to die rather than transgress, you're a hero. And if you're not willing to die, you've failed to be a hero. Is failing to be a hero a big failing or a little failing? It's a little failing. Failing to be a hero? You didn't get 100%. You got 97%. Is that a big failing? You didn't get the absolute top, the absolute best. That's not a big failing. How many people get to be absolute best? Right? So, therefore, he's not punished at all. There are nuances here I'm not going to, but that's the general idea. He's not punished for it because he's under gigantic stress. And that being the case, he has less responsibility. So, bowing to the idol or committing adultery are terrible crimes. But he's not a terrible criminal from the fact that he committed a terrible crime. Because you can't make the move from the action is a terrible action to the person's a terrible person. That's a wrong move. It's a move that we have that's not acceptable. So that's the general background. Now, in the last section here, which I may or may not finish today,
Is this like according to the Rambam as he wrote to the letter to Yemen?
That's a little different. In the letter to Yemen, they were, let's put it this way, the Muslim authorities were requiring that the Jews should say in public, I believe in Muhammad. Okay. Some Jewish authorities said, for this you have to die, and if you don't die, you're going to be condemned by God as someone who pledged allegiance to another religion, and so forth and so on. And the Rambam was horrified with what this person wrote, and he wrote a long letter to the Jews who to support them, and to say, first of all, it's not obvious that Islam is idol worship, and second of all, pledging allegiance to a prophet is not pledging allegiance to a foreign god, and so on and so on. And third of all, everybody knows you don't mean it, and the Muslim authorities also know that you don't mean it. They just want you to say the words. So to say that you're going to be condemned and hated by, he was really, but he said to them, you're suffering a terrible oppression, and no one should be criticized, for saying that in public. At any rate, what I want to do now is look at the arguments that are given by those who think that homosexuality is an equally valid lifestyle, and see whether those arguments hold logic. They hold any water in terms of logic. You could probably guess what I think, but I'll give them to you, and I have the rebuttals here written out on the list, and we can discuss them as we go. This goes back to the 70s. The American Psychiatric Association voted that homosexuality is not a disease. And since it's not a disease, it's not undesirable. Nothing wrong with it. And since there's nothing wrong with it, it's an equally valid lifestyle. Now let's see. Undesirable means nothing wrong with it. And since there's nothing wrong with it, it's an equally valid lifestyle. Who are the members of the American Psychiatric Association? Well, they're psychiatrists. Are they somehow specially qualified to make moral judgments? I could equally ask the question the other way. Are they not perhaps disqualified from making moral judgments? But I won't ask it that way. I won't say that. After all, to say that it is or is not a disease, if not being a disease means it's nothing undesirable and is equally valid, they're making a moral judgment. I don't think that we have to trust their judgment in terms of deciding what is good and what is evil. And that's only one journal, one association. They did other surveys of similar experts, and they get the opposite result. So it was a prejudiced sampling in the first place. So the fact that someone declares that something isn't a disease doesn't mean that it's binding on the basis of the fact that he's a doctor and knows how diseases grow and how they don't grow and how they go. If the conclusion is going to be it's an equally valid lifestyle, then he as a doctor has no expertise in making that judgment, and therefore no one has to be bound by the judgments of the American Psychiatric Association. I want you to know that when they came out with this ruling, money for studying homosexuality disappeared. Because the motivation for dedicating money is, I want to help people who are in a bad way. But if it's not a disease, it's equally desirable, and if it's equally valid lifestyle, they're not in a bad way. They're fine. So why study it? Study something where people are suffering and are unfortunate, and you can help them. So all the money dried up. I don't think that the judgment of the American Association, the Psychiatric Association, is valid for that. Now here's one that you also hear, although people should have gotten smarter over the years. Homosexuality is a genetic condition, and because it's a genetic condition, it's unchangeable, and therefore you can't be responsible for something that you can't change, and therefore it's equally valid. Just leave them alone. Well, every clause in that argument is wrong. First of all, when you say something's genetic, it could mean one of two things. You could mean that genes determine that it will be so, like the genes determine your eye color, or the genes plus your intrauterine environment determine your fingerprints. Or it could mean that the genes affect that outcome, but don't determine it. Like, for example, genes for great height. If you grow up malnourished, you won't be tall. The genes don't make you tall. The genes make you susceptible to becoming tall if you're well nourished. So it's the genes and the nourishment that make you tall, not the genes alone that make you tall. No one said that the genes make you into homosexual. What they meant is that, statistically, people who have these genes are more likely to become homosexual. That's what they meant. That turned out to be wrong also, but leave that alone. And therefore, it's more likely, so the genes have a role to play, but not that it was genetic determinism. And the proof of it is that you have identical twins, one of whom is a homosexual and the other one is not. So if the genes are determining it, that couldn't happen. But identical twins have all the same genes. So number one, it's not fully genetic. Number two, unchangeable. Now, if you have a tendency or have developed, let's say, a certain type of behavior and set of desires and attitudes and orientation, how would you know it's unchangeable? That's a very, very gigantic, strong claim. Unchangeable means can't be changed. How many different ways of changing it have you tried, after all? Well, we tried these therapies and it didn't work. Did you try combinations of therapies? In different orders? Different strengths? Different circumstances? Did you try it with different cultures? Unchangeable is a gigantic thing to say. And we're careful not to say, no one would say this disease is unconquerable. We'll say, we haven't found a way yet, but who knows, but tomorrow we might find something. So to say this unchangeable is just a gross exaggeration of what you could possibly know. And of course, there are therapies, and of course, there are therapies that actually do help. You're not allowed to say that. If you say that, you lose your psychiatric license and all the rest of it. But in fact, it happens to be true. People who are in the process of education know that it's true. They know people for whom it has actually happened. So, but just to say unchangeable in general is. Now, let's see. Let's suppose something's a genetic condition and is unchangeable. Suppose it were. Hence, no responsibility for what you do? Really? Let's suppose a person's a kleptomaniac. The people who steal. Let's say we're genetic. I don't know, but let's say we're genetic. And it's unchangeable. Does that mean that he's not responsible for stealing? Well, what about this? Hire a person to go with the kleptomaniac into the store and watch his hands. As far as I understand, he won't steal. The whole point is to get away with it. So he could stop the behavior himself just by hiring somebody to go into the store with him. So what we're interested in now is not becoming a different person. We're interested in controlling your behavior. The fact that the condition is unchangeable, if it were, it isn't, but if it were, doesn't mean that the behavior is not controllable. There are all sorts of techniques for controlling behavior. And let's suppose all three were true. It's genetic, and it's unchangeable, and it's uncontrollable. Does that make it equally valid? How about colorblindness? Colorblindness is genetic, and it can be anyway. Genetic, and it's unchangeable, and it's right? Does that make it equally valid? Oh, there's no difference between seeing color and not seeing color, because they're both genetic and they're both unchangeable and not responsible for them. So if I have a way to give color vision to a colorblind person, not worth doing because it's equally valid, I don't think that conclusion is true. I think we look at certain conditions as unfortunate. They're unfortunate even if they're genetic and unchangeable and you're not responsible for them. They're unfortunate. And therefore, if they could be changed, it would be a gift to change it for the person. So the whole argument, every clause in the argument is a mistake. Just wrong. Well, homosexuality is isolated, not correlated with any other undesirable behavior, and they were equally valid. Homosexuals don't steal more, and don't murder more, and don't cheat more, and don't lie more, and don't not more guilty of fraud, and so forth and so on. Well, maybe yes or maybe no, but that wasn't the question. The question wasn't, is homosexuality a marker for other types of crimes, so you have to be worried about these people? The question was whether homosexuality is an unfortunate condition in and of itself. So the fact that they aren't marked, I'm not sure that this is true, but let's say if it isn't a marker for other crimes, wouldn't be relevant to the argument at issue. Another argument that's given is homosexuality is problematic. People think of it as problematic or worried about it only because of social rejection. If society becomes enlightened, people don't reject homosexuals, there won't be anything wrong with it. And the rebuttal here is social acceptance does not render all undesirable behavior valid. Consider the Nazis. If you have a whole society of Nazis, that doesn't mean being a Nazi is okay. It means the whole society is bad. So the fact that they won't be attacked by other people and won't be criticized by other people doesn't mean that they're okay. It could be that the whole society is entirely wrong. And then you have this attitude, who are you to judge somebody else's lifestyle? It's paternalistic to judge somebody else's lifestyle. You should just keep your nose out of other people's business. Well, that's just not true. A few days ago, We talked about the article in The Economist about the guy who killed himself because he got a positive result on a test for AIDS. We talked about, he made a mistake in statistics, and he thought that the test showed that it was a very high probability that he had AIDS. He made a mistake. No, the probability would have been 20% or 10%. He thought it was 96%, and he killed himself. And you hear him talking to himself, I have AIDS, I can't live, and so forth and so on. And you try to explain it to him, and he doesn't want to listen to you. It's putting the gun to his head. Do you say, oh, I can't judge his lifestyle. I'll let him commit suicide? No, you knock him down and tie him up. Explain it to him, and then he'll thank you for the rest of his life. So it's not paternalistic. People make mistakes. And sometimes other people can see they make mistakes. So it's not paternalistic to judge other people's lifestyle. And the final argument, which isn't worthy of mentioning in itself, I'll mention for completeness, is if you have anything against homosexuals, that's because you're a homophobe. You're suffering from homophobia. You're really threatened by and afraid of homosexuals, maybe because you have inklings that you too are a homosexual and you can't stand the thought, and that's where it's all coming from. Well, excuse me, this isn't worthy of a 3-year-old. Let's say I'm a homophobe. I gave arguments. Don't attack me, attack my arguments. If you attack me, that means you're just afraid of my arguments. If all my arguments are true and I'm prejudiced, you're in trouble because the arguments are true. So if you're attacking me, it's because you're afraid of the arguments. I once did this in public. The guy said this to me, and I said, thank you for confirming that all my arguments are correct, because all you have left is to attack me. That's just, when I was in university, this was considered the lowest of the low. It's called an ad hominem attack, attacking the person rather than attacking the arguments that he gives. And I made this up, but then other people picked it up, not for me, later. What about if I say about homosexuals, you know what's the matter with you guys? You're all suffering from heterophobia. You're all dead afraid of the fact that you can't make it with some of the opposite sex. That's why you're doing it, and you're covering it up and making it an equally valid lifestyle. It's really because you're afraid. Are they going to be moved by that argument? I don't think so. Why not? Because it shouldn't make any difference. It shouldn't make any difference. The AMA says that there's such a thing as homophobia. Yeah, they say it. Congratulations. More politics. Any more than heterophobia. So that certainly shouldn't be taken into account. And therefore, I claim that there's no reason whatsoever to treat homosexuality as an equally valid lifestyle. That the Torah's view is not weakened at all by the arguments that they present, and that the Torah's view has no objection that could be raised against it. Now, we went through a lot today, I'm leaving the outlines here, and we can start tomorrow if anybody has any questions, or you talk to people, you have other observations, we can start with that, and then tomorrow I'll go on to another topic.